The size of the library was 120 square feet, held more than 1,000 books. There was no plumbing, therefore no running water, and at one point during its short existence, it was one of America's smallest libraries with a librarian in attendance. This little library operated on Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue in the Deanwood neighborhood in Northeast DC from 1976 to 2008. The one-room metal and glass kiosk sat in front of a McDonald's restaurant at the entrance of the Marvin Gaye Park. That's where the librarian would have to go to lunch and then use the restroom. The little library was built because the Deanwood neighborhood didn't have a library for the majority of the time that the Deanwood neighborhood was in existence. The name Deanwood was created from the grandson of Levi Sheriff, whose name was Dr. Julian Dean, around 1888. And the Deanwood neighborhood didn't receive a public library until 1976. And it was put on the street that used to be called Dean Avenue. Dr. Dean added an E to the end of the family name, but it didn't stick and wasn't spelled that way for very long. The Deanwood neighborhood became a predominantly black community, and the residents have always complained that their neighborhood didn't receive the same infrastructure as other neighborhoods in DC, west of the Anacostia River. I would like to use a quote from a Deanwood resident taken from quotes collected by the Anacostia Oral Histories Project in 1975, 2 years after Congress passed the Home Rule Act of 1973. This act allowed DC residents to self-govern and elect a mayor and a city council, because before that, DC was governed by Congress. These were politicians who wasn't aware or cared for the reality of what it was like living in a segregated city and a neighborhood without common infrastructure, like Deanwood. In 1975, Mrs. Ethel G. Green's interview is where she discussed her father's efforts to convince a senator governing the Deanwood neighborhood for money to build new schools, sidewalks, water systems, lights, and etc. She said in her interview, the senator told him, "You don't need water, you don't need sidewalks, you don't need these things because if you get them, it will increase your taxes." According to DC Public Library Archives, this library was one of the library kiosks that were built in largely black communities. Miss Gwynn of the Friend of Deanwood Library Group said, during that time in the 1970s, the only libraries that were built or existed were west of the river, the Carnegie libraries, where they were these big, grand libraries. So we got this kiosk. The little library served as Deanwood's only library for 32 years before the DC Public Library decided to close it, and 4 other small libraries in 2008. The tiny one-room libraries were set up in the 1970s and in the early 1980s in some of the city's poorest neighborhoods in order to increase the access to books where full-service libraries didn't yet exist. 30 years later, the library board explained the need to close them was that many neighborhoods were getting new libraries, and the small kiosk libraries weren't getting much use anymore. The 5 specific library kiosks that sat empty and unused were the Langston Library Kiosk on Benning Road near Spingarn High School, the Sursum Corda Kiosk Library on New York Avenue in Northwest that was directly across the street from the Perry School, the Parklands Turner Library on Alabama Avenue in Southeast next to Turner Elementary School, and the Deanwood Library Kiosk in Northeast. The R.L. Christian Library kiosk on 8th Street had closed in 2009, but it was used for a little while for art installations, and it was used as a ticket box office for the Fringe Festival. The Deanwood kiosk sat empty and vandalized. Then a car ran into it in 2020. Then it just sat and became an eyesore. The Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, also known as DMPED, was looking to award long-term leases for the empty kiosks to anybody who wanted to put them to good use, because there was no longer a public use for them. When the decision was made to close the kiosks in 2008, the residents already had better access with transportation to the larger libraries because of the expansion of the metro system east of the river. Chief Librarian of the DC Public Library, Jenny Cooper, she had said the kiosks were 25% as busy as the least busy neighborhood library. Because of their small size and limited weekday hours, average daily circulation at the kiosks were 15 to 20 books. Computers were used 30% of the time, compared with 70% or more in the larger libraries, and there was no space for any programs as workshops, community meetings, or story times for the children. Nancy Davenport, interim director of library services, said cost was not a factor in the decision. She said residents have more options now than they did when the kiosks opened. The libraries around them have improved so much since the late 70s and early 80s that I really don't want people in those neighborhoods to think that this is all the DC Public Library can offer them. So instead of continuing to have this useless eyesore in the neighborhood, DC government decided to demolish the little Deanwood kiosk, and some of the residents protested. There was a change.org petition created in order to prevent its destruction. Since the petition was launched, the local ANC commissioner told WUSA 9 the demolition was put on hold. A spokesperson for the DC Public Library said they can't maintain the site with taxpayers' money if it's not a current library. WUSA 9 interviewed Alicia Rucker with Friends of Deanwood Library, and she said it needs to be preserved or given back to the community. Arnett Lee said, "Oh, I remember the kiosk. I would like the kiosk brought back to life. There are still a lot of kids in this community, so I'd love to see them be able to walk and get a book." As you can see here from the now closed petition, it only collected 155 signatures. The kiosk was torn down in the winter of 2022. The current Deanwood Library is 1 mile away and co-located at the Deanwood Recreational Center, and it opened its doors in 2010, 2 years after the kiosk library closed. Now there are plans to replace that with a new standalone full-service Deanwood Library. It will be built at the Deanwood Metro parking lot as part of a joint development project with WMATA. Replacing the small Deanwood Library with a full-service neighborhood library will give access to library services and resources comparable to the other larger libraries around DC. The project is estimated to be completed in 2029. It will be located across the street from the current 7,300 square foot library located in the rec center. Then the library space in the rec center will revert to the Department of Parks and Recreation for their future use. In Surfsome Quarter, the kiosk was replaced with a 5,000 square foot library in Northwest 1 on L Street in Northwest. The Northwest One Library is co-located with the Walker Jones Educational Complex and is slated to be replaced with a new full-service 20,000 plus square foot library. This new library will be located in the Edgewood Eckington neighborhood, and it is expected to open in 2030. The Langston kiosk on Benning Road was torn down and replaced with the Dorothy Height Library further east on Benning Road. The R.L. Christian kiosk had its books and computer equipment sent more than 1 mile away to the Rosedale Library. The Rosedale Library is located in the Kingman Park neighborhood in Northeast, and it opened in 2012. The library is co-located with the Rosedale Community Center. The Parkland's Turner Library has moved its location across the street to a small storefront located in the shops at Parkland Strip Mall in 2009, and it offers a wide range of services, and it's located within walking distance to the Congress Heights Metro Station. I want to give a big thank you to Abel Getachew for sponsoring this video. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly, but thank you. And I want to really thank everyone who follows my channel and loves and appreciates DC history as much as I do. There are so many places and subjects we need to cover, and I got the time to try and cover them all. So thank you for sticking with me and suggesting different subjects and neighborhoods. I have made a very long list, and I have a lot of history to look up, and also finding the photos to match. I'm Dickie D, your DC tour guide, and I will see you around Washington.